I never trusted my sister Chloe, but when my 7-year-old daughter vanished into the dense woods behind our childhood home, and her golden retriever stumbled back alone, carrying a blood-spattered yellow hair ribbon in his teeth, I knew my worst nightmare wasn't just beginning. It was family. The air in Oregon is different in late October. It carries a heavy, damp chill that sinks directly into your bones, smelling of decaying pine needles and wood smoke. I always hated that smell. It reminded me of my childhood, of this house, and of the suffocating dynamic that had defined my entire life. I was 32, a mother to a beautiful 7-year-old girl named Lily, and a wife to a man, Darius, who was currently halfway across the country on a business trip. But the moment I stepped foot into my parents' sprawling, rustic estate at the edge of the Cascade foothills, I wasn't a mother or a wife anymore. I was just Arthur and Mary's disappointing eldest daughter. Sarah, darling, don't just stand there letting the draft in. My mother, Mary, had chided the moment we arrived for the annual family weekend. She barely glanced at me, her eyes immediately dropping to Lily, who was clutching the leash of our golden retriever mix. Barnaby, oh, look at my little angel. And she brought that large animal with her. Barnaby is family, Mom, I said, a defensive edge already sharpening my tone. But the tension didn't truly snap until the front door flew open hours later, and she walked in. Chloe. Chloe was my younger sister by 3 years, though she demanded the attention of a toddler. She was the golden child, the charismatic, volatile, fiercely unpredictable center of our parents' universe. While I was the quiet achiever who paid my own way through college and built a stable life, Chloe was the beautiful disaster. She bounced from failed startup to failed relationship, constantly needing to be bailed out financially and emotionally by our parents, and they loved it. They loved being needed by her. "Auntie Chloe is here," she announced, dropping a ridiculously expensive leather duffel bag onto the hardwood floor. She looked disheveled but striking, as always. Her blonde hair was a calculated mess, her eyes wide and manic. "Chloe, we didn't know you were coming." My father, Arthur, beamed, abandoning the fire he was stoking to wrap her in a massive hug. "I couldn't miss family weekend, Dad," Chloe purred, but her eyes slid past him. They locked directly onto Lily. From the moment she arrived, something about Chloe was entirely off. She had always been indifferent to my daughter, treating Lily like a mildly annoying prop. But this weekend, Chloe was obsessed. She shadowed Lily constantly. She brought her a strange, antique porcelain doll that looked entirely too fragile and unsettling for a 7-year-old. Whenever I entered a room, I would find Chloe kneeling dangerously close to Lily's ear, whispering things I couldn't quite catch. "What are you two talking about?" I asked on Saturday evening, interrupting them in the sunroom. Lily looked up, her blue eyes wide, clutching Barnaby's fur tightly. Chloe stood up, smoothing down her cashmere sweater with a slow, deliberate smile. "Just girl stuff, Sarah," telling her about the fairies in the woods. "You remember the fairies, don't you? The ones who take away little girls who don't keep secrets?" A cold spike of adrenaline hit my chest. "Don't tell her things like that, Chloe. She has an active imagination. You'll give her nightmares." "Oh, lighten up," my mother called out from the adjacent kitchen. "Chloe is just playing with her. You're always so overprotective, Sarah. It's suffocating for the poor child." I bit my tongue, the familiar, bitter taste of being the outsider in my own family flooding my mouth. But my maternal instincts were screaming at me. I watched Chloe walk away, her hips swaying, but not before she shot a glance over her shoulder. It wasn't a playful look. It was calculated. Cold. Sunday morning arrived with a thick layer of fog pressing against the windows, obscuring the dense tree line of Pine Ridge Woods, just 100 yards behind the house. The woods were notorious in our town, thousands of acres of unmapped, rugged terrain. People got lost in there. As kids, we were strictly forbidden from going past the old stone wall marking the property line. I was in the kitchen, aggressively scrubbing a pan I had used to make breakfast, trying to burn off the anxious energy that had kept me awake all night. My parents were in the living room, arguing over a crossword puzzle. "Hey, sis," Chloe's voice drifted into the kitchen. I turned. She was wearing a heavy olive green parka and thick hiking boots. "Lily and I are going to run into town. Get some ice cream. She wants mint chocolate chip." I frowned, drying my hands. "It's 40 degrees out, Chloe, and town is a 20-minute drive. She hasn't even finished her homework." It's a Sunday, Chloe groaned, rolling her eyes. God, you are so boring. Dad already gave us the keys to his truck. Come on, it'll take an hour. Before I could argue further, my father's voice boomed from the living room. Let them go, Sarah. It's good for them to bond. Stop hovering. I stood there, trapped by the family dynamic. If I said no, I was the controlling, jealous sister. If I said yes, I felt a deep, twisting pit in my stomach. Fine, I relented, my voice tight. But Barnaby goes with you, and you are back in exactly 1 hour. Keep your phone on. Aye, aye, Captain, Chloe mocked, saluting me. I watched from the kitchen window as Chloe walked out the back door, Lily skipping beside her in her bright yellow raincoat, holding Barnaby's leash. The dog seemed hesitant, his tail tucked slightly, but he followed his little girl. They walked around the side of the house, out of my view, heading toward the driveway. I went back to the sink. The clock on the microwave read 1:15 p.m. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself it was just ice cream. But as the minutes ticked by, the silence in the house felt heavier, thicker, like water rising in a locked room. By 2:25 p.m., they weren't back. I paced the length of the kitchen, my phone glued to my palm. I had called Chloe's cell phone 4 times. The first 3 times, it rang out to voicemail. The fourth time, it went straight to her automated greeting. She had turned it off. Mom, I said, walking into the living room. Chloe's phone is off. They should have been back 20 minutes ago. My mother sighed, dramatically folding her newspaper. Sarah, really. Chloe is a grown woman. She probably took Lily to the park after ice cream. You know how she loses track of time. She didn't answer her phone, Mom. She turned it off. Maybe the battery died, my father interjected, not even looking up. Stop looking for reasons to be mad at your sister. You've been hostile since she walked through the door. I am not being hostile. I am being a mother. I snapped, the volume of my voice startling even me. I'm going outside to wait. I grabbed my coat and pushed through the front door, the freezing air biting at my cheeks. I marched down the porch steps and rounded the corner toward the gravel driveway, fully expecting to see my father's silver Ford F-150 pulling up. I stopped dead in my tracks. The truck was parked exactly where it had been all morning. My heart seized. It didn't flutter. It felt like a cold, iron fist had clamped down on it. The truck was here. They hadn't gone to town. Chloe? I yelled, my voice cracking through the fog. Lily! Silence. Only the faint whistling of the wind through the pines. I sprinted to the truck. The windows were frosted over. I looked inside. Empty. I spun around, scanning the property. The lawn was covered in frost, undisturbed, except for a clear set of tracks leading away from the driveway, wrapping around the back of the garage, and heading straight toward the old stone wall, toward Pine Ridge Woods. Panic, absolute and blinding, consumed me. I didn't run back into the house to get my parents. I didn't have time for their denial, their excuses for Chloe. I ran toward the tree line, slipping on the slick grass, my breath pluming in white clouds before me. Lily! I screamed, my throat tearing. Lily! I reached the stone wall. The tracks in the mud were clear, Chloe's heavy hiking boots, and beside them, the small, distinct indentations of Lily's rain boots and paw prints. Barnaby. Why would she take her in there? Chloe hated the outdoors. She hated the dirt. I climbed over the wall, the damp stones scraping my palms, and plunged into the forest. The temperature dropped immediately under the canopy of massive, ancient pines. The fog was thicker here, swirling around the trunks like ghosts. Chloe, this isn't funny. Bring her back. I pushed through thorny underbrush, ignoring the branches whipping against my face and tearing at my coat. I followed the footprints as best as I could, but the ground was a blanket of dead pine needles, making it impossible to track them perfectly. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The woods grew darker, the trees packed so tightly together that the afternoon light barely penetrated. My lungs burned. The silence of the woods was unnatural. There were no birds, no rustling squirrels, just my own ragged breathing and the frantic snapping of twigs under my boots. Suddenly, a sound shattered the quiet. It was a sharp, guttural bark, followed immediately by a high-pitched yelp. Barnaby! I screamed, surging forward in the direction of the sound. Barnaby! Here, boy! Lily! I tore through a thicket of ferns, tripping over an exposed root and slamming hard into the freezing mud. I scrambled to my knees, gasping for air. When I heard the rustling, something was coming toward me through the brush. Fast. I froze, terrified. For a split second it was a bear or a coyote. The ferns parted, and Barnaby burst into the clearing. "Oh, thank God," I sobbed, reaching out for him. But as the dog got closer, my relief violently morphed into raw, paralyzing horror. Barnaby wasn't wagging his tail. He was shaking violently, his ears pinned flat against his skull. He was covered in thick, dark mud, and a deep gash ran along his left shoulder, weeping fresh blood into his golden fur. He was whimpering, a pathetic, broken sound that tore my heart in half. "Barnaby, what happened? Where is she?" I cried, grabbing his collar. That was when I saw what he was carrying in his mouth. It wasn't a stick. It was bright yellow. With trembling hands, I pried Barnaby's jaws open. He dropped the object into my muddy palms. It was Lily's yellow hair ribbon, the one I had tied in her braids that morning. But it wasn't just muddy. It was soaked, drenched in fresh, bright red blood. A scream built in my chest, a primal, animalistic sound of pure agony, but it lodged in my throat. I stared at the ribbon, my brain refusing to process it. Then, Barnaby nudged my hand with his wet nose. He whimpered again and pawed at the ribbon. I looked closer. Tied clumsily to the blood-soaked ribbon with a piece of fishing line was something else. A small, heavy object. I snapped the fishing line and wiped the mud away. It was a silver, engraved Zippo lighter. I recognized it instantly. It belonged to my father, but he had given it to Chloe years ago. I flipped the lid open with shaking, mud-caked fingers. Slipped inside the casing, wrapped tightly to avoid the flint, was a small, torn piece of lined paper. I pulled it out and unfolded it. The handwriting was erratic, jagged, written in black ink. It was Chloe's handwriting. The note had only 5 words. "Mom and Dad chose me." My blood ran completely cold. The world tilted on its axis. This wasn't a kidnapping for money. This wasn't an accident. This was revenge. A sick, twisted game from a sister who had spent her entire life competing with me, finally deciding to take the one thing I had that she never could. I looked up into the suffocating darkness of Pine Ridge Woods. "I'm going to kill her," I whispered into the silence. The note in my hand was a declaration of war. Mom and Dad chose me. My mind raced, slamming through a terrifying Rolodex of memories. Chloe's smug smile in the kitchen, my father eagerly handing her his truck keys, my mother's casual dismissal of my anxiety. They hadn't just enabled my sister's unhinged behavior, they had actively created the space for it. But my brain couldn't process the depth of that betrayal yet. The only thing that mattered was Lily. I shoved the lighter and the note into my coat pocket. My hands were shaking so violently, I could barely zip the pocket shut. "Barnaby," I choked out, dropping to my knees in the freezing mud beside the dog. His breathing was shallow, his golden eyes wide with distress. The gash on his shoulder was deep, sliced clean by something violently sharp. A knife. Chloe had stabbed my dog when he tried to protect his girl. I ripped off my wool scarf and wrapped it tight around Barnaby's chest and shoulder, tying it in a brutal knot to staunch the bleeding. He let out a sharp whine but licked my cheek, a smear of mud and blood against my freezing skin. I pulled out my phone. No service. Of course. We were deep in the pocket of the valley, shielded by thousands of acres of dense timber and granite cliffs. Going back to the house meant wasting at least 40 minutes. And if my parents were somehow complicit in this nightmare, walking back into that house could mean losing Lily forever. I looked into Barnaby's eyes. "Find her, boy," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Find Lily." Despite his injury, the golden retriever pushed himself up on 3 legs. He sniffed the mud, gave a low, rumbling growl, and began to limp forward into the darkening woods. I followed him. The fog was thickening into a soupy, blinding gray, and the temperature was plummeting rapidly. The late afternoon light was already fading, casting long, skeletal shadows through the pines. We tracked for what felt like hours but was likely only 45 minutes. My boots were soaked through, my lungs burning with the icy air. Every snapping twig sounded like a gunshot. Every rustling fern made my heart stop. I was operating purely on primal adrenaline, a feral mother panic that drowned out the freezing cold. Then, I saw it. Draped over the jagged, broken branch of a dead cedar tree was Lily's bright yellow raincoat. "Lily!" I screamed, Lunging forward, I tore the coat from the branch. It was empty. There was no blood on it, but the zipper was broken, as if it had been ripped off her violently. Barnaby sniffed the coat and barked sharply, pivoting his head toward the steep incline to our left, the ridge. My stomach plummeted. The ridge led up to the old Hobbs property, a rotting, abandoned logging cabin from the 1950s perched on the edge of a deep granite gorge. When we were teenagers, Chloe used to sneak up there to drink and smoke. She called it her castle. It was miles from the main road, completely isolated, and dangerously close to a sheer 70-foot drop. If she had taken a 7-year-old up that steep, treacherous incline in the freezing fog, she wasn't just hiding, she was cornered. And Chloe cornered was the most dangerous thing on earth. "Come on, Barnaby," I urged, grabbing a thick, heavy branch from the forest floor to use as both a walking stick and a weapon. The climb was agonizing. The ground was slick with wet moss and loose shale. I slipped repeatedly, tearing the skin off my palms, my knees bruising against jagged rocks. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. The image of Lily's terrified face spurred me upward, turning my fear into a blinding, white-hot rage. As we crested the top of the ridge, the wind hit us like a physical blow, howling through the gorge below. Through the swirling mist, the silhouette of the Hobbs cabin emerged. The roof was half caved in, the windows blown out decades ago, but flickering faintly from inside the darkened structure was the warm, unnatural glow of a fire. Barnaby let out a low snarl, the hair on his back standing straight up. I clamped my hand gently over his muzzle. "Shh, stay." I crept toward the cabin. The heavy wooden branch gripped so tightly in my hands my knuckles were entirely white. The wind masked the sound of my footsteps. I pressed my back against the rotting exterior wall, creeping toward the open doorway where the wooden door had long since rotted off its hinges. I held my breath and risked a glance inside. There was a small campfire burning on the dirt floor. Sitting on a rusted metal drum, her blonde hair matted with sweat and dirt, was Chloe. She was humming, a sickening, out-of-tune lullaby. In her right hand she held a large, serrated hunting knife. And huddled in the far corner, shivering violently in just her sweater and jeans, her hands bound together with heavy zip ties, was Lily. Her face was smeared with dirt and tears, a rag tied brutally tight over her mouth to gag her. My heart physically hurt, a violent, ripping sensation in my chest. "Don't cry, little bird," Chloe cooed, not looking at Lily, running her thumb along the flat edge of the blade. "Mommy's going to be here soon, but not your fake mommy. We're going to be a real family now, just like they promised. Just like they promised." The note wasn't a metaphor, it was a contract. I didn't think. I didn't plan. The mother bear instinct simply took over, hot and absolute. I stepped out from the shadows and walked straight into the cabin. "Let her go, Chloe," I said. My voice didn't shake. It wasn't loud. It was dead, flat, and colder than the wind outside. Chloe jumped, spinning around, the knife raised instantly. Her eyes were completely manic, blown wide and reflecting the orange flames of the fire. For a second, surprise flashed across her face, followed immediately by a twisted, resentful sneer. "Sarah, you just couldn't stay away, could you? Always ruining my moments." Lily screamed through the gag, thrashing in the corner, her eyes wide with desperate relief. "I'm not going to ask you again," I said, stepping closer, raising the heavy oak branch to my shoulder like a baseball bat. "Drop the knife, and step away from my daughter." "She's not yours," Chloe shrieked, the sudden volume echoing violently off the cabin walls. "She was never yours. You stole everything. You got the perfect husband, the house, the kid. I was supposed to have this." "Mom and Dad said I was supposed to have this." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, taking another step forward, placing myself directly between Chloe and the door. "They see it now," Chloe laughed, a jagged, broken sound. "They see that you're smothering her. You're too rigid, Sarah, too boring. Dad said you're ruining her spirit. They gave me the money, Sarah. $50,000 to take her. We're going to Canada. They're going to tell the police you were negligent, that you let her wander off. They're going to get full custody. And then they're giving her to me." The horror of her words hit me like a freight train. The truck keys, the casual dismissals, the insistence that I was suffocating Lily. My parents hadn't just ignored Chloe's madness, they had weaponized it to steal my child. "They played you, Chloe," I lied, my voice steady, though my soul felt like it was crumbling. The police are already at the house. Darius called them an hour ago when he couldn't reach me. They found Mom and Dad. They're blaming the whole thing on you. Chloe froze. Doubt flickered in her manic eyes. You're lying. Am I? I challenged. You really think Mom and Dad are going to go to prison for you? They used you, Chloe, like they always do. You're the scapegoat. For a split second, her gaze dropped to the dirt floor, processing the betrayal. That was all the time I needed. I swung the branch with every ounce of strength in my body. The heavy wood connected squarely with Chloe's wrist. There was a sickening crack, and she screamed, dropping the hunting knife into the dirt. But Chloe was feral. Instead of retreating, she lunged at me, tackling me to the ground. We hit the dirt floor hard, a tangle of limbs and screaming. She grabbed a handful of my hair and smashed my head back against the earth. Stars exploded in my vision. She was scrambling, her wild eyes searching the dirt for the dropped knife. "I'll kill you!" she shrieked, her fingers wrapping around the hilt of the blade. She raised it high above her head. I threw my arms up to block my face, bracing for the burning tear of the steel. A golden blur launched through the doorway. Barnaby hit Chloe with the force of a battering ram, his jaws snapping directly onto her forearm. Chloe screamed, a blood-curdling sound of pure agony, as the dog dragged her backward, away from me. Despite his bleeding shoulder, Barnaby stood over her, snarling, his teeth bared, entirely prepared to tear her throat out if she moved a single inch. I scrambled to my feet, gasping for breath. I didn't look back at Chloe. I threw myself into the corner and pulled a small pocket knife from my own coat, frantically sawing through the thick plastic zip ties binding Lily's wrists. I pulled the gag down from her mouth. "Mommy," she sobbed, throwing her arms around my neck, burying her face into my chest. She was freezing, shaking violently, but she was entirely whole. "I've got you, baby. I've got you," I cried, holding her so fiercely I thought I might crush her. I picked her up, burying her inside my coat to share my body heat. I walked over to Chloe, who was sobbing in the dirt, clutching her bleeding, broken wrist while Barnaby growled inches from her face. I kicked the hunting knife far into the darkness of the gorge outside. "You're going to rot in a cell," I whispered down to her. "And if you ever come near my family again, I won't need a dog to stop you." I whistled sharply. "Barnaby, come." The dog released her, backing away slowly, never taking his eyes off her, before pressing his bloody flank against my leg. We left her in the cabin, howling into the dark, and began the agonizing descent back down the ridge. It took 2 hours to reach the edge of the woods. Through the trees, the flashing red and blue lights of county sheriff cruisers illuminated the fog. My husband, Darius, frantic and terrified, had called the local police when our neighbor, who had an emergency key, checked our home in the city and found we weren't there, and my parents wouldn't answer his calls. When I emerged from the tree line, carrying Lily, covered in mud and blood with a wounded golden retriever at my side, the chaos erupted. Paramedics rushed us. Police swarmed the woods to retrieve Chloe. But the true twist of the knife came an hour later, inside the sterile warmth of an ambulance. A detective approached me, holding a plastic evidence bag. Inside was my mother's cell phone. "Ma'am," the detective said, his face grim. "When we detained your parents, your father tried to destroy this. We recovered the text threads between him and your sister. They wired her $50,000 this morning. And there's a drafted police report in your father's office claiming you were intoxicated and lost your daughter." I stared at the phone, my own flesh and blood. The people who raised me had plotted to destroy me and steal my daughter, simply because I didn't play their toxic games. They were all arrested that night. Chloe, Arthur, and Mary, charged with kidnapping, conspiracy, and child endangerment. We moved out of state 3 weeks later. Barnaby made a full recovery, earning his place sleeping at the foot of Lily's bed for the rest of his life. I never spoke to my family again. Sometimes, monsters aren't hiding in the dark woods. Sometimes, they're sitting at your Thanksgiving table, smiling right at you. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and share it with someone who loves true crime and crazy family drama. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next gripping real-life survival story. Have you ever had a toxic family member cross the line? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe out there, and see you next time.